Canceling student debt. Hi, I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Our attention is driven this week to the idea that the incoming Biden presidential administration may want to cancel student debt for university loans. It's clear that this is a very bad idea. I'm going to ask you to stay with me for 10 or 12 minutes here. When I used to work in the media and journalism and public relations realm, we had a phrase called burying the lead. What that meant was you put the lead of the story in the 6th or 7th paragraph. Well, I'm going to do that today. As a matter of fact, I'm going to bury the lead all the way to the end and try to induce you to stay with me for 12 minutes or so, because there really is a one-sentence conclusion to this, but I have to build the case first before we can get there, so please stay with me. So the Wall Street Journal this week was talking to some students, and they asked them whether their debt should be canceled. Here's one of the responses from a college student. Quote, "Think of it as a stimulus package. By forgiving student debt, the government can free up disposable income for more than 40 million Americans," end quote. Yeah, okay, sorry for laughing at this university student who apparently doesn't understand economics very well. Yeah, you could do that with any stimulus. Why would it have to be education? Look, here's a point I've made to my students so many times. I stand in front of the class and I say, look, the government has no money. Let me repeat for you. The government has no money. Or to quote Jay Richards in his great book, Money, Greed, and God, he says, quote, "The money government spends comes from somewhere," end quote, says Jay Richards. Jay Richards is right. It has to come from somewhere. So this would be a redistribution scheme. From where? That's the only question. Look, I've been teaching for about 30 years, and I've had approximately 5,000 students, and I've made the promise to every one of them. If they wanted, I would redistribute their grade to a student who skipped class. Well, it's been 30 years and 5,000 students. I've had not one taker yet. Why is that, do you suppose? Do you suppose the fallen nature of my students says, I want people to redistribute their goods to me, but when it comes to my redistributing my goods to some other student, 5,000 of them have refused that offer. I mean, one may accept it this semester, but you realize what I'm saying here? This is so clear, I've said so many times in class. Without the fall, there's no economics, because economics is about the distribution and production of scarce goods. Without the fall, there's no scarcity. And without the fall, those students would want to distribute their grades, but they don't. So why do they want everybody else's goods distributed to them? That's the question we look here in canceling this debt, because in canceling student debt, it would be a redistribution of goods. Hey, how about this? Why don't we make the offer to students to increase their debt, therefore paying forward, good phrase, huh? Paying forward so the students who come after them would have less debt. Why don't they do that? No. Because they're missing this assumption that Jay Richards makes so clear and all of us understand. There's no free lunch. It has to come from somewhere. They want other people's goods distributed to them. And it's regressive. Look at this. The largest proportion of U.S. student debt, 59% of it, according to a Brookings Institution analysis, is held by people in the highest and second highest income quintiles. You don't get too far into economics before you understand quintiles. The 20% categories of income. And what the Brookings Institution is saying is you're canceling debt. 59% of it is held by people in the two highest income quintiles. They incurred debt to gain degrees, often expensive ones such as medicine, dentistry, and law. But those degrees have paid off for them. Canceling student debt would require taxpayers who never went to college to share in the burden that students took on voluntarily, in which many are handling just fine. It would be regressive. Look, very, very few people support regressive tax redistribution schemes. Canceling student debt would be regressive. People in the bottom 3 quintiles would pay for those in the top 2 quintiles. Try to sell that in a democratic system ever. It just doesn't work. Here's another good quote from Patrick Gary. Has a great little book called The False Promise of Big Government. And he's saying this point. Of course, it would make it bigger, but here's Patrick Gary. The foundational argument underlying big government is a myth. Big government does not help the poor, the working class, and the middle class, even though those groups provide the justification for big government. In fact, big government often hurts the supposed beneficiaries of government largesse. Those who gain the most from big government, wait for it, are the elite and the powerful, says Patrick Gary in his little book, The False Promise of Big Government. He's exactly right. And canceling student debt would increase the size of government and would increase the regressive nature of the distribution of goods, which very few people agree with. Yeah. Here's another quote from the Wall Street Journal when they're talking to students about this. Young adults who seek a college education make hard choices about how to pay for it. Canceling our debt, this is a student writing, would be a relief, but also a cop-out. We must learn to persevere, says the student. Paying off college loans will teach personal responsibility and hard work. If we get everything handed to us, how will we learn to appreciate what we have and what it took to get there, says one of these students writing in the Wall Street Journal. The student's exactly right. So often I've said to students, look, when an employer looks at hiring you as a college graduate or somebody else who's not a college graduate, much of what they're looking at is, did you have the ability to persevere to get things done? Could you get a project done, right? Because going to college is a project. So you figure out which one you're going to go to, how you're going to pay for it, which, canceling debt means you don't have that part anymore. Will you work and study at the same time? Are you going to be involved in athletics or extracurriculars? How are you going to get things done? Getting Things Done is a good book, actually, by David Allen, but that's not my subject today. Often a college degree shows a prospective employer that you were able to get things done. You were able to show a professor that you could get work done. And so much of a college degree is that. It is much more, obviously, but that's the point. And so if you cancel their debt, you're taking away a big part of what goes into a college degree, which is figuring it out. And once you have a degree, you're able to say to a potential employer, I was able to figure it out. I did this project. But now there's students who want their debt canceled. We're saying, I don't want to figure it out. This is called moral hazard. I think one of the most interesting examples of moral hazard is NASCAR. I used to be a pretty big NASCAR fan. They made the cars so safe that it encouraged dangerous driving. That's a really good definition of moral hazard. Does your behavior increase dangerous activity? In NASCAR, it did. The cars are so safe that drivers can hardly be hurt, and so it encourages them to have more accidents. That's the same thing that's going on with this college student debt cancellation fiasco. It would say there's moral hazard. I have a family member who worked hard to pay off a student loan. Now she's going to look stupid for doing so, isn't she? Right? Her friends will look at her and say, why did you do that? If you had waited, the government would have paid it off. So this moral hazard will ring down through generations. People are going to look at each other and say, well, why should I pay off my house? Why should I pay off my car? Why should I pay off my credit cards? If I wait long enough, someone else will do it. That's moral hazard. And that takes the economy the negative direction that you want it to go. So the next generation of students could well expect their future debt to be canceled too, and take on educational expenses beyond their means. This is moral hazard. Canceling student debt may only exacerbate the problem it seems to solve. After all, wouldn't the policy give colleges the green light to raise tuition even further and encourage students to take out even more debt to keep up? Debt forgiveness will benefit many Americans today, but I worry it will also prepare the next crisis for tomorrow. Look, one of my funny sayings in class is, when Willie Sutton said, because that's where the money is, he answered two questions. Number one, why he robbed banks. And number two, why the 4 richest counties in the United States are suburbs of Washington, D.C. Let me unpack it for you just one more time. Willie Sutton was a bank robber. When they asked him, why do you rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. He also unwittingly answered the question, why are the 4 richest counties in the United States suburbs of Washington, D.C.? Because that's where the money is. The bigger the government gets, the more money there is there, the richer the suburbs get. And it's frankly not bureaucrats living in those expensive houses. They're lobbyists. And they're lobbyists for the educational institution, the one in which I work, actually. I'm in the educational institution. So this has become very clear, and it is the old government game. Support and support and support something until it gets too expensive, and then say, oh, it's so expensive, we must take it over. Well, you're the one who caused it. And one of the major reasons for the increase in tuition has been because the government's subsidizing it. If the government would stop subsidizing education, the price would go down. Here's another guy writing in the Wall Street Journal in response to this article about paying off debt. And he's asking, is it fair? He's writing, he says, a guy paid his way through junior college and then worked for a university degree without taking on debt. Tell him that the dude who messed around getting a photography degree from Santa Barbara Art Institute should have taxpayers bail out his bill. The notion is ridiculous, end quote, says a writer in the Wall Street Journal. And you can see where this is not fair. This is setting up two types of America, the paying America and the receiving America. There's no longer e pluribus unum. It's e pluribus pluribus. You'd have payers and receivers. Yeah. And as I said earlier, the reason why cost college education keeps going up, because student loans are too easy to get. The federal government caused this crisis, much like the Fannie and Freddie Mac crisis caused the mortgage crisis. Universities have been the beneficiaries of the federal government loans. And the students were the pass through the agents. They're left with the bag, right? I watching The Crown the other day, and Margaret Thatcher had this great quote. She didn't actually say it this winsomely, but I'll shorten it up for her. She said, and this was when the British government was in trouble and the economy had huge debts, and they were just going backwards. And her answer was, when you're sick, would you prefer a nurse who gets you out of bed or keeps you in it? Isn't that a great quote? When you're sick, would you rather have a nurse who gets you out of bed or keeps you in it? This is the same question we should be asking these students. You've gotten yourself sick via a loan. Would you rather we get you out of bed or keep you in it? That's a fascinating statement. Thank you, Margaret Thatcher, and thank you, The Crown. It was really, really well-written series of programs. Yeah. The demand curve slopes down and it slopes up. Okay, in economics, listen, if the price for college gets too high, it will drive students to the trades, which it should. You know, the system will take care of itself if you just leave it alone. You don't mess around with this. The markets work. This is something, markets work, government doesn't. It's a very simple phrase. The first time I heard it, I think, was from Dick Armey, who was the Speaker of the House, congressional representative from Denton, Texas. And he was speaking at Dallas Baptist University, and he said clearly, markets work, governments don't. Well, that's what we're seeing here. If you left the universities alone, the markets would work. Higher prices would drive students out of universities into trade schools, and it would all just take care of itself. Just leave it alone. Right? Well, so why do we have this public education anyway? Largely, it stems from Martin Luther's Protestant Reformation. And maybe he wasn't thinking ahead. Perhaps an unintended consequence of him breaking from the Catholic Church was he lost his educational system. So there's a famous letter to the councilman in one of the cities of Germany claiming, look, we need to have public education. And that is a really great letter, and that's really where most of our public education comes from today. I mean, why do we have education? A lot of our education comes from the Christian belief that the individual makes a decision before God to accept or reject the offer of Christ. You have to be able to read to understand that choice. So much of education in our history comes from people wanting to be able to learn to read the Bible. There's a rumor that Michelangelo, the guy who painted the Sistine Chapel, there's a rumor that he owned a copy of the Scriptures, which was against the law at the time. Why? Because the Catholic Church was trying to say to people, we make the decisions. We're the only ones who can read the Scriptures. They were only in Latin. And so the populace were not able to read. Michelangelo would have broken a law by owning that Scripture. And so, the first thing Martin Luther did after the Protestant Reformation was lock himself in a barn and translate the Scriptures from Latin into German. Why? So everyone could read them. Why do we have public education today? So people can read. Mostly so they can read the Bible, and this is where it came from. Listen, this is because Christians believe in the individual salvation level. So the individual has to be able to read the Bible for himself and make these decisions. I teach at a Christian liberal arts university. Liberal comes from this idea, the Latin word meaning to be free. So if you were going to be a free person, you had to have a liberal arts education. The trivium, the first three parts of it, were grammar, rhetoric, and logic. And you had to be able to read, understand logic, and understand the ability to speak before you could understand how to vote. And this is what liberal arts means, and this is why we have education. Yeah. So I promised you in about 14 minutes I was going to give you a one-sentence answer, and I'm almost there. One more minute and we'll be there. So we asked this question. What's the purpose of education? This takes much longer to unpack, but I'm running out of time. People often confuse education and training. Education is the why, training is the how. Say both are valuable, and don't value one over the other. So at my university, I teach at Dallas Baptist University, we offer education. People all over the Dallas area offer training in HVAC systems, in bricklaying, and electrical, all kinds of things. One is not better than the other, they are different. But education is the why, training is the how. And we know that in economics, education does increase an economy. There's no question about that. But who should pay for it? So we're getting to this conclusion. See, if education is for the individual and it's about life, which means it's a liberal arts education, the individual should pay. But if education is for the community and it's about a trade, then the community should pay. I'll repeat that one sentence. Here's our conclusion. Who should pay? If education is for the individual and about life, the individual pays. If education is for the community and it's about a trade, the community pays. That's it. Canceling student debt is a very bad idea. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist, where our slogan is fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time.